remember the beginning of Kingdom Hearts? Sora is in a limbo-like shadow area standing on cathedral-like objects made of stained glass that show a Disney princess in a scene from a movie. Usually, if you were to be defeated by the Heartless, you would start over from the beginning of the fight. However, if you were defeated on top of the snow-white cathedral, exactly in the center of the apple she's holding, you won't start before the battle. Instead, Sora respawns in a different cathedral. The first thing one notices about the area is the music. Instead of being choir-like or happy, as the music in the game often is, the music is nothing but this odd static sound, accompanied by a single broken violin attempting to play a scratchy version of Simple and Clean. The longer one stays in this area, the louder the music gets, and even if the television is muted or turned down, it won't shut up. As for the floor, it's like the Snow-White one. The color of the glass is harsher and the scene is somewhat more frightening than the original. However, instead of Snow White eating an apple, she is dead at the bottom holding the apple, blood leaking from all of her facial orifices as the Even Queen laughs in triumph while holding a bloody heart. As you progress in this new place, the other cathedrals have similar scenes. Beauty watches in horror as her father is devoured by the beast. Sleeping Beauty lies completely still, with her face a gaunt gray, hinting at death, I assume, while King Philip is burned to death by Dragon Maleficent. Cinderella is sold into slavery by her stepsisters. The scenes show what dark ending could have been put into the stories. The details in the pictures, especially the gruesome segments, are far more advanced than one would expect from a game of this time. The Heartless you face in this area are also different. Instead of being cute shadows, they are horrifying. They have red eyes, with yellow irises and sharp claws at the ends of their hands. They're taller than Sora and much more slender. They move insanely fast and often dispatch all but the most experienced players. They are also difficult to see, as they blend in with a black background. Most people are only able to see their eyes. The staff and shield don't work against these creatures, so only people with a sword are able to fight them. Most people who randomly stumble upon this often reset the game, thinking it's a glitch, because they're unable to get farther than the first cathedral. However, there are some who have made it much further. The music gets louder, as mentioned before, and a strange whispering can be heard beneath the noise and violin. Finally, the player makes it to the last cathedral in the area and fights the giant Sora Shadow Heartless. He is different than the one you usually fight. There is no heart-shaped hole in his chest and his eyes are red with yellow irises. The fight is rather short, as well. The giant grabs Sora, who gets wrapped up by the darkness. It begins to enter his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. Sora screams, while the violin plays louder, combining with the whisperings and other screams until it becomes a mess of noise. Then the darkness covers Sora completely. Most of the noise, save for the whispering, abruptly stops and the words, "Game over," flash continually on the screen. It's different from the usual game over screen, as it doesn't show Sora floating below his heart, nor does it have any options to return to the game or title menu. Players who try to reset the game and start over find that every time they try to play that copy, all the screen shows is the game over screen with a whispering in the background. The few players who made it that far reported to hear whispering when they are alone in rooms and have occasionally seen red eyes with yellow irises in dark and distant places. The designers of the game deny ever making this section and say the creatures, area, story, and music don't appear in the code. They claim it is a fabrication by people with a sick sense of humor. However, there was one designer, Akane Oyatami, who was on the game only in the beginning stages when the cathedral levels were being created and left shortly after this section was finished. Because he left so early, his role in the game is uncredited. He made some calls to the Japanese police after that, claiming there were creatures following him with red eyes and yellow irises. The police dismissed his reports as the ramblings of a lunatic and led him out of the police station. He was found dead the next morning, cut up by something sharp. The neighbor in the apartment next to him claimed they heard Akane screaming about eyes and whispering when they called the police. I was just 13 when the event happened. I was over at my grandmother's house as usual. We went there every Friday. But this visit was extra special. It was my birthday. Me and my family always went to my grandma's house on my birthday. When we got there, she had strung colorful papers all throughout her porch. Luckily, none of my friends lived on that side of town. I walked up the stair and my grandma greeted me with a hug. "Happy birthday, my sugar poop," she said in a cheerful, melodramatic tone of voice people of her age tend to have. She stopped hugging me and my dad and mother followed us into her house. It was worse. On the inside, my grandmother outdone herself this year. She had removed all of her tacky knickknacks from the shelves and replaced them with pictures of creepy birthday animals saying random things. She had put up a series of banners and a whole bunch of balloons on the walls. I noticed there were a couple of presents laying on the couch. I sighed in depression. I haven't been feeling really happy this past year. Not since my grandpa died. After his death, I felt like my whole being was torn and burned from existence. I stopped hanging around with my friends and my family members altogether. Almost every night, I would cry myself to sleep, thinking about my grandpa. After my grandma had brought out a circular cake, that was when I noticed something strange. The dinosaurs that the cake was decorated with seemed to be dull in color, and they seemed to be sad. Weird. My father lit the candles on the cake with his silver lighter that he always carried around with him. I was sitting on the couch when they brought the cake in front of me. They started singing happy birthday. When I blew out the 13 candles, a horrible stench hit me like a brick wall. The cake smelled like a rotting animal corpse that has been dunked in shit and left in the sun. I reacted and smacked the cake out my grandma's hand. It flew and splattered on the wall beside me. "What is the matter with you?" my mom yelled. "What's with a cake?" "I think Grandma put a dead dog in there," I responded. "I would never do such a thing. It was a simple vanilla ice cream cake. I thought it was your favorite," my grandmother said with a hint of sadness in her voice. I walked over and checked on the now destroyed cake. She was telling the truth. On close inspection, it had a couple of layers of ice cream and vanilla cake. "I'm sorry," I thought. "Oh, it's all right, Sugarpoop. We will buy a new cake after the party." My grandma handed me one of the two presents that were laying on the couch beside me. I opened it. It was a Blu-ray movie, The Land Before Time. Even though I like dinosaurs, I thought this movie was too childish for me. Thanks, Grandma. Grandma handed me another V-Day present. This time it was a brand new pair of Nike shoes. After the party had ended, I asked my parents if I could spend the night over at Grandma's house. They said yes. After going home and getting the stuff that I needed, I brought the Land Before Time movie with me back to Grandma's house in case I got bored or something. Several hours later, I was playing my Xbox on my grandma's flat-screen TV. I got bored really quickly, so I slipped the Land Before Time into the Blu-ray player. I pushed play and something strange happened. It started playing on the part where Littlefoot's mother dies. Littlefoot was immensely saddened by his mother's passing. He walked over to the now barren forest. Neither Ducky, Spike, nor Petrie were anywhere to be seen. Littlefoot was mumbling something over and over again. It sounded like he was saying, they are coming, in a very depressing tone. He walked to a small pond and dunked his head into the water. Several seconds pass. He still hasn't brought his head up from the water. After 2 minutes pass, his body started thrashing out, like Littlefoot was being drowned in the pond. He stopped thrashing and fell side first, on the ground, his head still in the water. What the hell was that? I couldn't believe what I had just seen. Did Littlefoot kill himself? No, that couldn't happen. Was this one of those hack movies? But it was brand new. All the stress I've been under was making me see things. Yeah, that was it. The movie started to glitch and skip, like the DVD was dirty or something. I took out the DVD and washed it under some water and dried it out with my shirt and put it back into the Blu-ray player. Same thing happened as before. It started playing on a random part of the movie. This time, Littlefoot, Ducky, Spike, Petrie, Littlefoot's grandpa, and Sarah were running away from something out in the desert. I couldn't tell what it was. They all had faces of immense horror as a huge shadow was forming over the land. While they were running, Littlefoot's grandpa tripped and fell. He landed with a large crack and he didn't move at all. The gang stopped to look at the fallen elder. They now had scowling faces. "Let's leave the old fool behind," Sarah suggested. "He's just dead weight." Everyone nodded with agreement, which surprised me. Everyone knew that the Land Before Time movies were about friendship and helping others. The gang started running again. After a few minutes, they finally made it to the mountains. Right as they got into the mountains, a massive meteor struck the exact location where Littlefoot's grandpa had fallen. There was a large explosion. It was so bright that I had to cover my eyes. After a few moments, the blinding lights died down. The land was nothing but burnt bodies and forests. The sun was blocked out. Ash was now falling like snow. The scene cut to an area of fallen trees. The dinosaur gang slowly pushed the trees off of them. They checked each other to see if anyone was hurt. They were all right. The scene slowly faded out into a black screen. I waited a few moments to see if it would fade back in. Nothing happened. I got angry and slammed the Blu-ray player with my fist, and a strange noise came from it. I looked to see if the screen had changed. It was still black, but it appeared to have some sort of writing. I couldn't read what it said, due to the fact that the words were way too fuzzy. All of a sudden, the screen cut to a scene where it showed the gang walking through the now burnt forest. Ash was still falling. Everyone in the gang had faces that were now realistically depressing. They looked like they could just fall down and give up right there, but they just kept on walking through the ash. Somehow, this reminded me of myself. The next scene showed the gang stumbling upon a giant long-necked dinosaur corpse. I could already tell that it was the corpse of Littlefoot's mother. The gang looked upon the corpse for a very long time, then Spike walked up to the corpse and started taking huge bites off of it. I could hear all the bones and tendons crunching in his mouth. I covered my mouth in disgust as I noticed that Spike's body was getting more and more decayed as he continued to eat the corpse of Littlefoot's mother. One by one, each one of the dinosaur gang walked up and started tearing large chunks of meat from the long-necked corpse. Their bodies becoming decomposed to the point where they were nothing but a pile of rotting organs and bones. After completely eating the long-necked corpse, Ducky had spotted a group of shark teeth struggling to cross the land. The scene suddenly showed Ducky attacking and biting one of the shark teeth. It wailed in pain as it toppled over. The camera panned over to the rest of the gang attacking and biting the rest of the shark teeth. Each one of them toppled over, screamed in agony, and died. I was now covering my mouth in disgust. I was dreaming. This couldn't be real. Instead of just shutting off the TV like any normal person would, I kept watching. Now instead of eating the dead bodies of the tyrannosaurs like they did to the corpse of Littlefoot's mother, they just stared at them. Suddenly, they started getting up, making low gurgling noise. Each one of the tyrannosaurs were now puking up large portions of blood and internal organs. They started attacking each and every dinosaur they found. Each one of them dying and rising once again. The process continues. When everyone was a rotting corpse, they all formed a massive group in the middle of the desert. An extremely decomposed Littlefoot walked out of the group and faced the screen, looking directly at me with those cold, dead eyes. I was scared shitless now. How can a children's movie be this fucked up? The undead Littlefoot started speaking in a blood-choked voice. Death comes to those who seek it. With that, the movie stopped playing and the main menu appeared. It was as though none of that really happened. I thought about what Littlefoot said, and I've been happy since. You remember Pac-Man? Yeah, the little yellow ball who has been the main mascot for Namco, now merged with Bandai, for 35 years now. The fella will always have a place in my heart, since the days I played Pac-Man World 2 on my GameCube. I didn't like the new reboot they gave him and all, though, as they made him an annoying high school kid trying too hard to be cool. But that isn't the point. Before I start, it's obvious that I'm a Pac-Man fan. I originally played the original arcade game on World 2's arcade bonus area, which allows you to play all of the classic games from the 80s. One day, I was chatting with my friend on Skype, who allegedly told me that he found a supposed version of Pac-Man, a ROM that was found and locked away in a safe in the back of an old arcade in some abandoned amusement park and extracted from a damaged PCB board. Honestly, I didn't believe him, but he gave me a link that I kept noted for a few days later, since I was busy with school at the time. Eventually, when I got home one late Friday, I hopped on my computer as I was originally going to play Morale 42 or Quake Live. However, I was reminded of a link my friend gave me thanks to the trusty notepad file I saved to my desktop. I opened the link up and was taken to a browser page. The page itself had the story and stated that players who were able to finish this original arcade game board suffered severe psychological and occasionally physiological trauma, up to and including death of the subject, and that the ROM's effect is significantly reduced. I put my hand over my face and paused, thinking this was all going to be another Lavender Town Syndrome hoax. But I digressed and clicked the link, leading to where I could play the game on my browser so I didn't have to risk downloading it and getting any creepy viruses, I guess. The game loaded with a corrupted ROM startup, accompanied by loud static before displaying the words insert coin. I noticed it briefly flashed from coin to soul for about a split second now and then. I hit enter and started the game. The familiar maze board that many gamers probably remember, displayed along with Pac-Man in the middle where the fruit would usually appear. The little jingle that was stuck in my head as a child played that it was REALLY off. It started out normal before slowing down, then speeding up, and growing loud toward the end while also going at a lower key. Once the jingle finished, I could move Pac-Man, presented by his iconic pizza shape. One thing I noticed was that I couldn't see any pellets unless Pac-Man came into view in certain channels. I also occasionally saw a blue ghost roaming the maze. He had a sad face in the style of that of a jack-o'-lantern, almost reminding me of something out of Ghost and Goblins honestly. Munching Pac-Dots played his usual wacka-wacka sound effect, but it was much deeper than usual. The ghost siren in the background was also slowed down. There were a few power pellets as any Pac-Man game would have, of course. I ate one and was briefly able to see a full view of the Pac-Dots and the location of the ghosts. This did not allow me to eat them, however, as when I touched the ghost, I simply died. Dying resulted in one of three things. The screen would zoom in on where Pac-Man had died and spin around while his death sound would play, but then convert into static. The screen would freeze before restarting, or the sprite of the ghost would flash upon the screen along with a loud screech. Needless to say, it pissed me off. I eventually cleared the first board and the next level started. This time, there was a red ghost who had a sinister smile. If he saw Pac-Man, he would charge down the channel you were on of the maze with an obnoxious buzzing sound. I should also add the fact that the level counter would occasionally flash to names, which I presume were the new ghosts that were added each time. The first level was named Lindy, which I can only assume is because he moves around randomly like Clyde. This time, it was Screamy. Judging from his A''S behavior, I think the name is well fitting. If you got out of his line of sight or while he was charging, would make things a bit easier. Only last thing to mention is occasionally his sprite flickered between his rather sinister bony grin to the original 8-bit sprite of Blinky, the red ghost in Namco's, or if you are American, Midway. Original arcade cabinets. The next level introduced a much more annoying ghost named Slendy, and as his name implies, he acted somewhat like Slenderman in a way. He would teleport around the maze at random, and even pop up right in front of your face. All music and sound stopped if he was in your view. If you stayed in his line of sight, he would start getting an angry look on his face, and then eventually turn yellow. At this point, if he does turn yellow, he will more than likely teleport on top of you. The next level introduced Old One, who happened to be pink. This was probably the worst of all as he would follow Pac-Man and phase through the walls of the board. His appearance was probably the most interesting, compared to the other ghosts. He had strange tentacles like an octopus or a squid, and he had some strange spot on the top of his head, almost like some sort of gemstone. Also, unlike the other three, he was the only one lacking a mouth completely. The fifth level was when things started getting weirder, though. The walls of the maze started disappearing. No, I'm not even kidding. They were vanishing and I could go through the board freely. It became more annoying this way, considering I couldn't stay straight and the ghosts got an advantage. After clearing this board, I noticed the next level was exactly the same. I can only presume the rest of the game was like this now, so I ended my game here. Dying results in a screen asking play again, along with a countdown. Accepting just resets the game, while letting the timer run out simply printed out game over in white text. If the latter of the three results I mentioned earlier regarding Pac-Man's death occurred, you'd get a jump scare of screaming with a screech when the timer reached a certain point. Afterward, there would be a red screen with insert coin occasionally flickering to please help. Eventually, I closed the game out and went to bed. Honestly, I never knew a classic could be given a dark twist, at least not like this. I really hope this was not a real game, for if it was, then I really feel guilty for those who had to play this. UPDATE, I had recently came back to this game after I saw this community's leader, Mudar, has played this game. It had apparently been updated just recently. The following text was as followed. Report 10/16/15. Additional repairs were completed on original arcade PCV sections N 1 through R6. Technician casualties, M. Harper, fell into catatonic state during testing. Declared brain dead. New ROM compiled. Noticeable changes. Asterisk unknown. End report. Most of the updates did list the supposed technicians who did edits to the PCV or all either died some way of some cause. This, however, caught me as it didn't list as many details as the others, so out of curiosity I decided to play the ROM. Playing through levels 1 to 5 weren't too much different. The sounds seemed to be altered slightly though, mainly Pac-Man's death, where it would sometimes play halfway before turning to white noise. Here it only played half of the sound but over and over like a broken record. The screech on the jump scare was also changed to high-pitched white noise. When I got to level 6, though, is when things got interesting. Upon entering this level, the walls of the maze were back. I began munching my way along the channels of packed dots. It was quiet though, the ghost siren wasn't playing in the background. I was rather suspicious and continued onward. There weren't even ghosts in the little ghost box. After munching, a certain number of dots led to something unexpected. I heard this loud, higher-pitched waka waka. Eating a power pill, I found out what exactly this thing was. It was another Pac-Man, but it was dark gray. I wasn't exactly freaked out though until after eating another set amount of dots, all the text boxes with score, lives, and whatnot changed to RUN. What sounded like the eyeball sound, what you hear after you eat a ghost in the arcade version as it runs back to the box in the middle at a deeper pitch, started playing. The dark Pac-Man started moving faster. Eventually it caught up with me and the screen started glitching, showing several stripes and letters. Pretty much the original level 256 taken to a whole new level of weirdness. After this, the screen cleared up and I was taken to a first-person view. What the hell? The graphics were pretty much like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Packed dots laid around and I couldn't tell what exactly was happening. Eventually I came across Pac-Man. What exactly was going on here? He was a 2D sprite with about 4 different directions, much like the said games above. He seemed to be wandering around the maze. I was confused and pondered to myself a bit. Then it hit me. I was a ghost. I decided my natural instinct was to catch the yellow orb per usual. It seemed he was running away from me, but even if that was the case it was freaky, seeing the damn thing coming forward with wide open jaws. Even if it's his simple pizza appearance. Upon touching him 3 times the game window flashed to black and simply stayed that way. Upon closing I can't help but wonder. What could this mean? Could this mean the ghosts were past Pac-Mans? Or even worse, past players? You can find a few versions of this game on the internet if you wish to play it. Probably the most popular place resides on Gamagelt. However, I warn you, you may not want to play it. I still love Pac-Man to this day and the original arcade game especially. But I never thought there was a darker tale to this maze. Pokemon Red and Green versions began development in 1989 and were considered complete and fit for release in 1995. It took a long time because of the problems surfacing along the way. These were considered, at the time, to be due to the game being on the cutting edge of new technology, because the programmers were overcoming bugs that no one had needed to work around before. In 1992-1993, when the first playable sections of the game were completed in alpha form, is what started the long struggle. HM moves didn't exist at this point. Instead, the player had to use items to get around. For example, the surfboard item allowed the player to surf across the water. This item was still in the programming when the beta version was released, and some more hardcore gamers managed to hack into the game again. Instead of cut, the player would use the item axe on trees. Instead of flash, you would use candle. The escape rope was supposed to be replaced by dig, but for some reason that item wasn't removed. It made perfect sense and seemed to work just fine until one of the alpha version testers used the candle inside of a building. The screen fogged up, the smoke screen attack animation covering everything. A text box appeared saying hurry, get away. The door sound played, the character would be returned to the overworld, the building would be blackened, and you could no longer enter it. The axe worked perfectly for removing small trees. It also worked perfectly on people on some sections of the fences that hemmed in the entire playable world. Upon using the axe on a human NPC, the sprite would vanish and be replaced by a small patch of dark pixels. This looked most like the blood it was meant to represent in the red version, and slightly odd in green. It became a morbid joke among the testers, who all assumed these things were programmed in just to try and spook them, and that they would be removed from the final versions. They were. Mostly. Escape rope was considered a step too far by some. Upon the player standing and facing a doorway, if you were to select the escape rope, it would form a noose and the player character would be hung. The only way to get out of this was to switch the game off and continue from the last save. One of the testers left, and a new person was hired in his place. The new guy didn't appreciate the sick jokes that the programmers played on the testers. The others simply left it off and told him not to be so pouchy. He insisted, however, that these were children's games, and that the programmers shouldn't be adding these things, even if they were temporary and meant as a joke. That was so long ago, I've forgotten his name. Kenta, or something. He complained to the higher-ups about the added extras. The programmers were questioned, and one was even fired over the incident. The claim was that they were wasting time and resources. To be fair, by this time we had music and basic sound effect in the game, which made the extra effects even more gruesome. Using the axe on a person would now trigger a high-pitched squealing sound along with the disappearance and the puddle of blood. Burning buildings also had an added repetitive crackling sound effect that was meant to imitate fire to the best of the old technology's ability. Lastly, if the escape rope was used, a singular crack would play. None of the programmers actually ever owned up to putting the dark extras in. They all claimed to have never seen them before, but they began to suspect each other when they realized their jobs were on the line. Who knows if that programmer that was fired actually had anything to do with it? It was decided that the items would be scrapped entirely, and HM moves were invented to enable the player to progress instead. The remaining programmers found that it was a lot of trouble attempting to erase the items from the code, and resorted to varying them to render them unusable or inaccessible. The effect was the same as erasing them, right? It worked, and the whole incident was forgotten. That is, until the beta versions were released to the public. Hackers started taking an interest in the game's coding. There were the famous incidents surrounding Lavender Town and the music that so badly affected younger players. But there were one or two cases in which hackers had uncovered the varied items in the game's coding, and the disturbing images that came with them combined with the overall music caused them to completely lose themselves. Almost no records of what happened exist, but I remember hearing on the news back then that a high school student had taken an axe to her classmates. She'd pulverized them as much as possible, turning them into indistinguishable puddles of human flesh. Her surviving friends said she had become obsessed with her new Pokémon game in the time leading up the attack. One of them in an interview for a TV news bulletin described her as a maniac for Pokémon. She was always excited about secrets in the games. The axe-wielding girl, of course, was hospitalized. She never spoke a word to anyone, but the nurses that took care of her claimed to hear her hum a tune at night. They said it was creepy and unsettling and made them feel uncomfortable. The girl is in her 30s by now, hopefully still somewhere secure. An older fan of the games had his office building burned down just months after the incident with a girl on the axe. It was played off by the media as nothing more than a tragic accident. After all, fire is quite a common risk in old, multi-story buildings full of paperwork. The strange thing about it was the only survivor was the man. Apparently, he had left the building preemptively, blocking the doors as he went. All the police managed to find was that the fire had started in a stationary cupboard, the only evidence being a pool of melted wax among the charred shelves and debris. He claimed that the tragedy shocked and horrified him and that he had nothing to do with it. He was still under suspicion, and the police found several boxes of candles and a few hacked copies of Pokémon Red and Green in his apartment. I don't remember if he was convicted for arson after that. I just remember a news bulletin on TV showing a burnt game cartridge in the man's home. There were more, all hushed up and forgotten with time. But with the modern world's computer technology, game ROMs, and so on, there is a real risk that someone might be able to uncover these items again. Unless, in the newer versions, the old alpha coding was successfully removed, but nobody would have been looking for it in order to do so, would they? The thought terrifies me. I don't think I can handle seeing these things happen again. Knowing that I was a part of it, that someone might eventually find me and question me. The music plays in my ears every day, that tiny pulse of Lavender Town. Although I've survived for this long, it's time to end the struggle. I'm writing this now as a warning to anyone who may read it. Don't go looking for buried items. My escape rope is waiting.